Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for documentary films. I'm Charles Bright, and I am joined by Traci Curry and Stanley Nelson, the directors of the Showtime documentary Attica, which recently made the Oscars shortlist for documentary feature. Stanley, I want to start with you. Do you have any memories of seeing or hearing about the Attica prison riot at the time it was happening in 1971?
Yeah, I have kind of a vague memory. I mean, I was 19, 20 years old, so I was a cognizant adult, but I didn't know the details, and I don't think the details of it really ever came out at that point. You know, we knew there was a riot. It was kind of a day-by-day thing, and then it was like, oh no, they went in and just killed a whole bunch of people. But we never knew really why the rebellion happened, and we never knew why they kind of went in with guns blazing.
And Traci, I'm curious because I know you were born after the riot happened, and I was curious, how did your perspective of this come into view from what you knew about it before embarking on this journey of making this film to completion?
Yeah, so when Stanley first asked me about working on the film, I, heard the word Attica, and I thought first what I think a lot of people probably think when they first heard of Attica, which is Dog Day Afternoon, and that scene. I think I was curious about what was it about this word and the event that was attached to it that was so resonant in the culture and was just so profoundly impactful that the mere mention of it, right, in this scene could sort of evoke all that they were trying to do there. And so when I first began digging into the research, it was a bit mind-blowing to find out that I and so many people knew nothing about what a civilian commission called the single deadliest day of state violence against American people outside of the Civil War and the wars on indigenous people. So that was shocking. And as we went through the process of digging more and more into the story and making the film, it was just mind-blowing to know that this event happened and so few people knew about it.
And I also want to ask you something else, Traci. Did you find that the former inmates were eager to talk about their experiences during the riot?
I don't know that I would use the word eager. I mean, I think, originally, as you can imagine, this was a profoundly traumatic event for everybody that experienced it. They weren't necessarily initially jumping at the opportunity to kind of tell a complete stranger all the gory details of this quite frankly, humiliating and enraging event that is an unhealed trauma for all of these folks. But as we began to have more conversations and they started to open up, and I, tried to be as transparent as I could with everyone in the film about what Stanley and my intentions were, it really all started coming out. And it was just very clear that all of those feelings and memories, not only for the prisoners, but for all of the people that you see in the movie, were still very present with them and very much there at the surface. So once we kind of got through some of that initial trust and kind of getting to know you, yes, everyone was very, very willing and happy to kind of talk about what happened to them.
And Stanley, I was curious about sort of the same question, but on the other end with the families of people, of the guards who would work there, and especially the ones who were killed during the raid on the prison. Was it difficult to convince them to be a part of this, or were they very willing to tell their stories?
I wouldn't say willing. I think that there are a certain number of people who were willing to talk about it from Attica, the town. I think there was a certain number of people also that just would not talk about it. Traci kind of got all the people to interview, so she knows better the hesitation that people had. But we got more than enough to talk about it. So that's a central element in the film, is that it's not only the prisoner's story, it's not only the observer's story, but it's also the guard's story and the guard's family story.
And Stanley, another question that I have for you is, do you think that the fact that most of the deaths that happened during that riot came at the hands from those in authority positions, and I guess I can't remember, it was the National Guard that stormed the facility?
It was the state troopers and prison guards. The National Guard were really used as medical help.
Okay, so these people in positions of actual authority were that most of the deaths came from their hands. Do you feel like that's been forgotten in history?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the deaths on the last day came from from law enforcement. All the deaths. So let's be clear. I think that one of the things that happened is that the first reports came out, and the first reports were that the inmates had slit people's throats and had killed people, and we have national news broadcasts in the film that say that. And then afterwards, when the medical examiner examined the dead, they found that no throats were slit, but it had already come out. So kind of the retraction is never as forceful as seen by as many people. And so till today, I think people think that the prisoners killed people on that last day, and no prisoners killed anybody on that last day.
And Traci, I'm curious as to what did you find it was universal from the family members of the people who had been killed during that last day? Was it pretty universal that they held law enforcement responsible for this, and they didn't even want, for a lot of them, they didn't even want compensation, right? They wanted an acknowledgement and an apology.
Yeah, well, remember, these are the families of prison guards, and there were some prison guards that were part of that force that went in, and there were also people in these families who had relatives that were part of the state troopers. So I wouldn't necessarily say that any of them would have pointed the finger at the individual members of law enforcement. However, they are very clear that Nelson Rockefeller was to blame. They're very clear that their lives had no more value in his eyes than did the lives of the prisoners who were killed. And they're very clear that they have been harmed by the state of New York, and that there has not, even 50 years later, been any justice for the harm that was done to them by the state. So I would say that, yes, they're all in agreement, and in agreement with if there's any point of agreement between the families and the prisoners, it would be about that, and the abuse of power from the state of New York, for which there was never any redress for any of them.
And one last question that I have for you, Traci, and Stanley, please feel free to elaborate on this as well. There are so many lessons to take away from this documentary, but what do you think is the most important one above all others to be taken away after viewing this?
I think, especially given where we find ourselves today, right, in this moment where there's this highly visible and vocal pushback against the state abuse of power through law enforcement. I think ultimately the takeaway is to understand that this is ultimately a story that continues to this day about what happens when people make a just and righteous challenge to the power and the abuse of the state's authority, and the lengths to which the state and the government will go in order to reassert that power in the face of those challenges. And I think it was very clear then, it's very clear now, and I think the film invites us to really think about and consider that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really clear in the film that these prisoners, our former prisoners, are human beings, and that we have to think about them as human beings, and that we have to think about the fact that the prison system has exploded, since 1971, and it's only gotten worse. It's not like it's gotten a lot better in prisons, that and there are people who are trapped in prisons, and we don't think about them. And I think it's really important that we think about them and see them as human beings.
Well, Stanley and Traci, thank you so much for joining us on this panel, and we look forward to seeing you for the group discussion in just a little bit.
Thank you.
I'm Charlie Bright with Gold Derby and our Meet the Experts panel for film documentaries, and I'm talking with RJ Cutler, the director of the documentary Billie Eilish, The World is a Little Bit Blurry, which is currently streaming on Apple TV+. RJ, I'm curious, has Billie seen the movie? And if so, what did she think of it?
Oh, sure, she saw it. She saw it towards the end of the process, which I always show my subjects the film before the rest of the world sees it, and when we're almost done with it. It's my conviction that the story belongs to the subject, even though I have final cut on my films, and this was a film where Billie trusted me to make the film, and was eager to give me final cut from moment one. It was something that I wanted to share with her and her parents and Phineas, her brother, and they did see it. We screened it for them on an IMAX screen. The response was very gratifying. I mean, I don't want to speak for Billie. She should speak for herself. But she did tell me after watching the movie that she felt that it saw her in a way that she never had imagined others would see her. That the film understood her, and she was very grateful for that, and the editors would want me to point out that when she met them, Greg Fenton and Lindsay Utz, she told them she wanted to buy them each a car. So that was a good sign. She has not yet made such a purchase. I will point out.
So I'm curious as to, what do you think is there's Billie Eilish is such an intriguing musical superstar to have at this moment in time. What do you think is the most compelling aspect to Billie Eilish as an artist?
Well, she's an extraordinary artist. She's a great poet. She's a great performer. She's a great composer. She and Phineas together are an extraordinary team of songwriters and performers. But most of all, she is a deeply empathic artist, and she speaks to her generation, and it's a generation that I think yearns for a deeply empathic, shamanistic figure like Billie to connect with them and to feel their pain and to communicate about it. And of course, her music, as we've seen in the last couple of years, since after we started making the movie, has reached the world over and is generationally transcendent. She is not only popular amongst her peers, she is of course, she has become a global phenomenon. This was not something we knew was going to happen when we started making this film. But I think the power of her work is in many ways because of her deep empathy, because of the way she connects with her audience, because of the way, in a way, she provides a healing resource for them. It's a tough world to be coming of age in now. We all know that because we have the perspective of adults, but to be a teenager now, to be a young woman in particular, it's tough times, and we get into that in the film. And Billie herself, between mental health and body image issues and the usual struggles of being of coming of age and a world on fire in all the different ways that means. To have a figure like Billie, I think, is a great gift. She's also I think of her in many ways as a documentarian. She writes about her life, her feelings, her experiences, her emotions, and she connects them universally to her audience.
So how long did you follow Eilish's life, and what led to you embarking on this journey?
Well, I started making the film because I met her. I was invited to come sit with her and Phineas and her folks in their backyard in Highland Park, the home that you see in the movie, and I sat with her for about an hour and a half, and with them, and I guess I want to say we just had a connection. I felt clearly that there was an opportunity here to make a film that was not only going to be about a young artist coming of age, but about a young woman coming of age. And I also felt there would be a great opportunity to make a movie about parenting and about siblings and about art and about creation and creativity and all. There were so many things that struck me from moment one in meeting her, and I felt for her. I felt as an artist a connection to her. And again, you know, you'd have to ask her what she felt. I don't want to speak for her, but we, you know, it was a great meeting. And it wasn't a meeting. It was just, you know, we got together, we talked about what we might do together, and then we decided, and we then started to make a film together. And that's what got me started. I filmed for about a year, 14 months, I would say. I also had the great benefit of footage that was family shot. Maggie, Billie's mom, is very adept with an iPhone and is the family chronicler, and had a lot of footage and trusted me and the editors of the film, Greg Fenton and Lindsay Utz, with the footage, and so we had access to that. We probably shot 800 hours of footage and had access to another 300 hours of family shot footage. So there was a lot to work with, and it was it's I think why the film has so much density, because of not only how much they trusted us and let us film with them, but also because of Maggie's filming as well.
So one of the things that really stands out is about Billie is how, for lack of a better word, how real she is. And I was curious as to whether there was any apprehension on her part about being the subject of a documentary and being followed by cameras.
Again, I think you'd have to. I never want to speak for Billie. She's Billie. She should speak for herself. But I will tell you that I can't imagine that she didn't have certain apprehensions. But she'd have to say so. She's very real on camera because she's a very real person, and she trusted us. And Jenna Rocher, who shot the film, is a brilliant artist and a brilliant verite DP. And she connected with Billie and Billie with her. And, you know, we listen, the verite process is one in which you're always earning trust. That's what the filmmaking is earning the trust of your subjects. And I like to say, just because you earn their trust on a Tuesday doesn't mean you have to earn it doesn't mean you don't have to earn their trust on a Wednesday. You always have to be who you say you are, and you always have to be earning your subjects' trust. And in the case of this film, our subjects trusted us, Billie and Patrick and Maggie and Phineas and all of the people in their orbit, and they placed their trust in us, and as a result, they were able to be very real on camera, and that, of course, was very, you know, gratifying to us.
So the last question I wanted to ask is, what about Eilish and her family did you find the most surprising to learn about during the process of making this?
It's a good question. What surprised me? I try not to be surprised. Because I try not to expect anything. I'm just trying to see it all as clearly as possible. I'm trying to really see what is the dynamic, what are the relationships, who are these people, what are they going through, what experiences are they having, what is the life that we're being given the opportunity to witness and to tell the story of. So as a result, I'm not surprised one way or the other. Was I surprised that Billie became the biggest star in the world? Maybe, I guess. I probably might not have predicted that, but I don't know. I might have predicted it. Was I surprised that they won 11 Grammys? I mean, you know, I'm not a Grammy prognosticator, but it was pretty surprising. But it's the moment to moment life that you're really interested in. Those big things, sure, an event happens here and there and goes one way or the other, but what you're really kind of focusing on in the filmmaking process is being able to see as clearly as possible and to witness as clearly as possible. And so you don't end up really feeling surprise. You end up, I mean, I guess on some level, I was surprised that the movie ended up being as much about parenting as it is about about creating art. Maybe if I had guessed, if I had articulated themes day one, I might have emphasized more that this was a film about a young artist coming of age, but and as I say, a young woman coming of age, perhaps more so than a film about parents experiencing what it was like for their children to leave the nest, which is really what the film is about in so many ways. So maybe that's a good answer to your question.
Well, RJ, thank you so much for joining us on our panel, and we look forward to seeing you for our group chat in just a little bit.
Can't wait. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for film documentaries. I'm Charlie Bright, and I'm talking with Robert Greene, the director of the documentary Procession, which is currently streaming on Netflix. First question I wanted to ask you, Robert, had you been wanting to do something about drama therapy before zeroing in on survivors of child sexual abuse perpetrated by Catholic priests?
I think, thank you. First of all, thank you. It's nice to see you. Thanks for doing this. You know, I think the awareness of drama therapy and the immediate understanding that I wanted to work with these specific guys kind of happened at the same time. But my awareness of drama therapy comes after years of making films that were sort of operating in that space, even if I wasn't actively thinking about drama therapy. Really, what happened was that I sort of had almost like a crisis of, why do I make documentaries? What's the point, really? What is the point of anyone making documentaries, not least of which me? And I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is about how trauma is stored in the body, in the muscles, and talk therapy has only so much of an effect. And drama therapy is one method for working through trauma and effectively. And I realized that in some ways, that's what I had been doing my whole career. And right when I was having this knowledge, I saw that the press conference that opens Procession with the 6 men that we ultimately end up working with. 3 of the 6 men were in that press conference that I just happened upon. And it just all sort of connected at the same time. It was this is an idea to move what we had been doing in documentary filmmaking forward, but also I just saw an opportunity to work with these specific guys and you know, try to uncover what they're dealing with every single day.
So what was the process like of getting the subjects, both the survivors and their lawyer, who I'm sure I guess you would have to go through first,
Of course,
to agree to participate in such a thing?
Well, so there were 3 men in that video that I saw, and standing behind them was Rebecca Randalls, who is a lawyer that had worked with all of them. And we were smart enough to go to Rebecca first. And it wasn't really a process of, hey, Rebecca, we want to make this movie, as much as, hey, Rebecca, should we make this movie? You know, we had an idea to use, my films in the past have used stage scenes and people playing roles to get at deeper truths, right? And so sort of just talking openly, like, hey, this is kind of where we are with our filmmaking. What do you think about trying something with these guys? And she, that started a series of conversations with Rebecca. And what you see, in the film, you see the first meeting we all had together where we are not only discussing our ideas, but we're also discussing, whether we should do it or not. The entire time we're making this film, every day could have been the last day of the project. And, for Rebecca, those discussions went on, like I said, for months, and she brought in a clinical psychologist who that were able to ask us some, opening questions, to sort of see, was this even a feasible idea? I met with drama therapy, a whole drama therapy group, and I pitched them my idea, and they shot down early versions of the idea, basically saying something to the effect of, you can't really do therapy on screen. And so what we actually, end up doing is the film is very much influenced by drama therapy, but it's not strict drama therapy. We're sort of using that as a launching pad to try to explore all these other ideas. So ultimately, really the trust that you see us gain with those men comes from the trust they had in Rebecca, first and foremost.
So one thing that I'm very curious about is, what was the script writing process like for the survivors? Because they each drew up their own scripts, and I'm guessing that that script writing was something that was not something they had done before. So
Sure.
What was that process like for them?
So it very different for each guy, right? So let's go sort of least script writing to most, maybe. Mike Foreman, would tell us story after story after story. And eventually we were basically cobbling together something like a screenplay for him to then go with Monica Finney, the drama therapist, and for them to sit down and work through what he was going to do in his scene. For Michael Sandridge, we had Dan Christian, who was assistant editor and doing a number of jobs. Like most documentaries, we were all doing a handful of jobs. And Dan would just talk through his ideas. And every single time he would say, what if we do something like this? He would jot it down. And then we basically presented that to him in script form. And then Michael would then make copious amounts of changes and notes. And the dialogue needs to be this way or whatever. Ed Gavigan did his own storyboards that you see in the film. And those were just a jumping off point, because really those were all about getting us into the space so that we can then explore and improvise off that original idea. So we never sat down and say, okay, here's a program, go type your scripts. It was really about us cobbling together stories that they were telling us in different scenarios and then presenting them to them as scripts. And then they could edit those and give us back to us. And that's what we ended up shooting off of.
One of the other, in addition to the survivors in the film, you also have a very compelling figure in Tarek, the young actor who plays the young version of the survivors in these reenactments. And I'm curious if there was a scene for Tarek that was when filming these scenes that was more difficult for him to convey those emotions than others.
I would say, first of all, the scenes are certainly difficult for us, the viewer, to watch. They were difficult for us to make. But that difficulty, I want to speak first to the viewer, what your experience might be. You understand the difficulty, the uncomfortability that you feel watching Tarek go through these scenes is an active choice. That's intentional, because we want you, the viewer, to be thinking about protecting that boy, because that's literally what an entire system was built up around: not protecting boys, not protecting children who are being abused again and again and again in the system. So that anxiety and that rising level of fear that you feel for Tarek is a choice made by us and made by the guys to give you that sort of feeling, that empathy, that compassion for that boy. And ultimately, it's for the guys themselves to feel the power of protecting that child, because that's what they needed. And that's what they're asking us to go back and do. Let me go back and protect the child version of myself. But the truth is Tarek was never uncomfortable. He always had his parents there. Or his grandparents were always just off camera. And even I'll be honest, I think even that annoyed him a little bit. He was 12 years old when he was making the film, and he's a remarkably strong young man. Dan, the location scout in the beard in the film, one of the 6 survivors, he's the one who picked Tarek because he saw the strength in Tarek that was sort of something that maybe as a survivor, he almost had this sixth sense. And it, I don't want to be glib about it, but it turns out if you don't abuse children, they can do remarkable things. They can be incredibly resourceful. They can be incredibly, if you give them the power to involve themselves, and you give them the power to say yes and no to things, they can do remarkable things. And I think when you see him say later in the film, I try my best to tell your story, which is one of the most impactful moments of the film for me. He's not being told to tell that. He's saying, I, Tarek, tried my best to tell your story. And he's owning those words. And I think he meant every word.
One of the other really memorable, impactful scenes is during the shooting in the confessional. I think the survivor's name was Tom. Who
Tom is in the confessional, and Joe and Michael.
Yeah, talk about his own thing because his case is currently in litigation.
Yeah.
So when he sees that there's a lock on the door of the confessional, that was extremely triggering to see. Were you? I mean, of course you were concerned about that, but what was your reaction when you saw how triggering that was for him?
Well, I'll go the global reaction first. The church that we shot in, that you see Michael, we do a whole scouting scene, and you see Michael pick this church. He shot in that. He wanted to shoot in this church because it felt like an older church. The reason why it felt like an older church, and you kind of get a glimpse of this in the film, is because it hasn't been renovated like every other church with all this abuse has occurred. Most churches have taken the locks off the confessionals, and that's very good, obviously, right? Like that is a movement forward. There is that you see Michael joking, they've renovated, they put the columns there. I don't know if I would have done that, but he's commenting in a funny way. But what he really is saying is they've transformed these spaces after this abuse was revealed. And then we find this one church where there isn't a lot of money. There are not a lot of parishioners. People don't go there every Sunday. It's a less used space, and that is telling for a lot of reasons. A lot of them economic reasons. And then we go in that confessional, and there's still that lock on that door, where there should be never have been a reason for there to be a lock on the inside of a confessional door. And when that happened, we were all. He's the first to see it. We didn't see it in the scout. It's almost like proof that we weren't victimized in this way, because we're not seeing those details. And then as soon as Tom saw it, he was like, oh, and then we were all like, it took our breath away. But what was remarkable was by that point in the process, you see in the film, we say, hey, let's shut this down. Are you okay? Let's walk away. He's like, nope, no. We're using this. And then you later see Tom literally says, no, I need to take this. I need to do this now. I'm in the zone. I'm feeling it. And Joe then says, use the lock, the anger of that lock to perform the scene. And just to see these survivors take this detail that meant that honestly, we didn't even see, but they could feel the weight of that detail because of what happened to them, and turn it into this creative, invention really in the moment, was just absolutely incredible. And it just really speaks to them taking this bull by the horns and turning it into what they needed it to be.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us on this panel, and we look forward to seeing you for the group chat in just a little bit.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the great questions.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for film documentaries, and I'm Charles Bright, and I am joined today by Jimmy Chin and Chai Vasarhelyi, the co-directors of the Nat Geo documentary The Rescue, which is currently streaming on Disney+. Jimmy, I'll put the first question to you. What was the reaction of the subjects to finding out that they might need to be filmed reenacting parts of The Rescue?
I think they were actually quite excited by the prospect, because they're very detail oriented and exacting type of people, as you might imagine, for very technical cave diving people. So it was really important to them that it was represented accurately and correctly. I mean, I think their participation in the film already showed their kind of enthusiasm to tell their story, but what we really wanted to get from them was to have them demonstrate what they actually did, so that it would, very accurately represent what they did. I think for both Chai and I, that sort of authenticity and accuracy is really, really important. And when we presented the idea to them in that way, they were very excited and enthusiastic to take part. I think mostly also because I don't think any of us could have imagined a non-diver trying to show us what was happening. So, and we just felt it was really important to include the actual divers, so what you're seeing is accurate, as accurate to the moment as possible.
And Chai, I want to direct this next one to you. How did you recreate the Thailand cave for the divers to reenact their rescue mission in?
I'm so happy that you asked this question, Charles. Basically, like, this film is the first time that either Jimmy or myself, had reenactments or recreation, so to speak. And we inherited a 3D scan of the actual cave from National Geographic, because they had this TV show called Drain Your Oceans, which like scan the cave. And it's like normally for a nonfiction doc, like, it'd be too expensive. So we inherited this, and so we're like, okay, we've got to shoot reenactments, because the only reason why we had to shoot reenactments is there's no footage. Like, there was something like, I don't know, it was like a minute of known footage from inside the cave. And, there was no other way except for animation to tell the story. So we decided to shoot reenactments. And so we're like, we have this 3D scan, so we'll get a fancy set builder. And we got very lucky, and they made the set. And then Jimmy and I showed up in England, like in the height of the pandemic. It was like October 2020. And, we're like, we'll see our cave. And we showed up, and like the cave is basically 5 feet big. Like, it's 5 feet long. Rick Stanton is at least 6'2". I'm just saying, like, so it was like one of those moments where we're like, oh, okay. Like, what are we gonna do? We only had 10 days in the tank. And I have to say that, like, we worked with this very special underwater cinematographer, Ian Seabrook, who was wandering around the set at Pinewood, where James Bond is happening a few, meters, like 100 meters away. And he found someone's like old set. Like, it was like The Abyss. It was like, or I don't know, Mummy. It was like someone's like a very big Michael Bay extra piece of cave. And we all looked at it and we're like, oh, okay, now we have 3 times as much cave. But the real issue was, is it going to dissolve or disintegrate in the water? Because that's the other big thing about reenactments in water, is that, can you guess how we muddy the water and why it's so difficult and like so tricky?
I have no idea. Please tell me.
Okay, well, Charles, like, you know how you create like mud in a tank? You use ground broccoli.
Really?
I'm not joking. Like we used ground broccoli. And the reason why you use it is it's so expensive. Like, it takes several days to drain a tank. So if it gets too muddy, you're out a lot of money. So we're like, okay, we'll put this like someone's cave that we stole or borrowed or whatever it is into our tank, and let's hope it doesn't disintegrate and mess up our water. So that's how it all happened. And it was, I have to say, like, everything about this film, like, this is the hardest film that Jimmy and I have ever made, which is funny, like, after coming off of Free Solo, because that was a really hard film to make. But this one, like, the constraints were so fundamental in a way that there was like very little known footage from inside the cave. It was the first film we've ever made that we weren't present for the principal action. There was a global pandemic.
And everybody knew the outcome.
Everyone knows what would happen. At the same time, it felt urgent to us, like, I don't know, as Asian filmmakers, as parents, just this idea that maybe we can tell a story about what connects us as opposed to what divides us. And I think we all know that the past few years have been defined by division and, dissension.
First of all, I have a feeling a lot of people would probably say that's probably the best use for broccoli, but
I agree.
I actually like broccoli, so
I do too. I like when my kids eat it. Yeah.
Jimmy, how were the one thing that I find so that continues to boggle my mind is how were the children and their coach able to survive for 10 days before they were actually discovered by the rescue divers?
Well, they certainly didn't grow up in Manhattan.
Yes. I mean, I think that that just their situation in Thailand was such that they grew up with very limited means. And I think that sort of grit that you grow up with when you live lives like that. And I also think that, I mean, just in terms of kind of the physical science behind the body, you can go that length of time without food, but you can't go that length of time without water. And so there was some water coming out. Well, obviously the cave had flooded.
Of course you'd say that. I'm sorry, it's so extreme when you say that.
I know, but it's true. But I truly believe that what allowed them to survive was also the fact that the coach used to be a monk and was going through daily meditation with them to literally lower their heart rates, keep them calm. And in a situation like that, when you're panicking, you're burning a ton of calories. And just psychically, you're in a much different place. And by kind of working with the soccer players and having them meditate and slow down their breathing, that had a huge impact on, I think their capacity to survive. And that is actually, such a big part of the story because, we tried to introduce a lot of ideas that might not be familiar to everybody. And the idea that, we all have different belief systems, but who's to say whose belief system is real, right? Mm-hmm. Because they are very real to people who live in different parts of the world. And so the story about the princess, the story about the monk that had come to visit, we were introducing a lot of these different ideas because this is a story in a way about East meets West and some of the friction that happens, but also how people kind of overcame these differences in belief systems, ideas, languages to come together to save these children.
And Chai, what I'm curious about is, usually when you have a story where you have so many different factions coming together to try to do something, there's always chaos, but usually it does not end well. And I'm curious as to how surprised you were when actually diving into, forgive the metaphor, how these different groups of British recreational divers and the Thai military and US forces as well, how they were able to come together, and even though there were rocky points, were able to successfully carry out this mission.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the heart of the story, right? It's like a lot of different types of people, different languages, religions, faith systems, ethnicities, came to get like volunteers and professionals, like professional military, and then volunteers like the divers came together, and only together were they able to achieve something that truly was, seemingly impossible. And so, there are two things. One, I will forever be humbled and start getting emotional every time I talk about it, is these British cave divers and Dr. Harris, who's Australian, they only had something to lose. They're not being paid to be there. They're volunteers. And like Dr. Harris is the best example. Like, he's a professional anesthesiologist in Australia. Should he kill one of those kids, he's never going to practice again. Like, who's going to want to be who's going to want to be put under by the guy who killed the kid in the cave? Like, just period. And like, his wife was really clear, who's also a doctor, about that fact. But still, it becomes about like this idea of like absolute morality, where if you can do good, if you can do the right thing, simply, like, why won't you? And I can think of many reasons, as like a inhabitant of Manhattan, or like, filmmakers who are calculating like that, why we wouldn't. But the point is that these divers, Dr. Harris, like every Thai Navy SEAL, every volunteer, they didn't hesitate. And they took on immense risk to save 13 strangers. And if we all could find that generosity and that graciousness and that kind of selflessness, we'd be in a really different place with the pandemic. We'd be in a really different place in the world. And I think that's why, like, Jimmy, like, this film was like impossible. Like, really, there was nothing to illustrate what was happening. And like, you're like, oh, it's a great story. Everyone knows how it ends. We have no access to the kids. Like, it was like every problem was possible, but it always seemed like it was the right thing to do. And I have to say that, like, I think I can speak for both of us that, like, struggling to tell this story, like kind of like using the craft and trying to squeeze the craft, is kind of something that sustained us through the pandemic, because it was like the right thing to do. It was just like the right thing. We didn't know if it would play out. We didn't know if people would understand it for what it is. But, this is the best of us as humans. And reminds us of what we have in common.
Well, Chai and Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us on this panel, and we look forward to having you join us for our group chat in just a little bit. Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for film documentaries. I'm Charlie Bright, and I'm joined by Megan Mylan, the director of the documentary Simple as Water, which is currently streaming on HBO Max. First question I wanted to ask Megan, what aspects were you looking for when determining which families to document for this film?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the question. So the film is told in 5 distinct vignettes, each one focusing on a family in a different country. And the choice to do that was to try and find a way to convey the scale of the mass migration and displacement of that the Syrian war had wreaked. To honor the scale of it, but do so in a way that let me do what I do, somewhat feels organic to me, which is very intimate, observational. And so I wanted to find a way for the film to be both large and intimate at the same time, and get in all of the different layers of experience, or as many as we could, of what the experience of displacement and war is. And so it felt like one family's experience of that would be anemic to the scale of the situation. And so once I sort of landed on that structure, I did a deep dive pre-production research, and then the team started expanding beyond me. And there were hundreds of conversations, of course, first with Syrians who had been through it firsthand, but also with freelance journalists and trauma experts and refugee field workers, trying to come through like what were the common lines of the family experience of war. And one of those elements, for example, that you see in the film is children taking on adult responsibilities. And so we have a couple of different chapters where, big brothers are really serving as parents. Another element is that fathers often go ahead when families flee war to make sure the passage is safe and to figure out a route. And then families get stuck in, Kafkaesque bureaucracies. There are gender norms that flip. Children end up out of school for years at a time because they're in sort of an interim country waiting. And so it was, sort of collecting all of those sort of topical thematic through lines, and then doing the work. And since we shot in 5 different countries, but we actually searched for families in 8, of trying to identify families who were experiencing that, would be going through it at a moment that we could get access to them, but then most importantly, that wanted to collaborate with us on the film and had that sort of film magic to them, had that dynamism. I try and, show a lot on people's faces and just in their interactions. And so I worked really extensively. We had 2 Syrian co-producers who worked across storylines, but then each country had sort of a mini family team. Often both our Syrian co-producers, one of whom is a refugee himself, but a lot of the production assistants and researchers were as well. And they would work with freelance journalists to go out scouting for families. So it was as intricate a process as that answer was to you. So, but it was, it's that mix, right? People have to be in the right moment, the right time, sort of going through the right things, and then they just have to have that right dynamism. And in my case, because of that, trust is so important, as it is to most documentary filmmakers. They have to want to collaborate.
You mentioned that you were filming in several other countries, but there is one vignette that does actually take place inside Syria. And I wanted to know what sort of steps had to be taken to successfully film the segment about the family that's still living there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we filmed that chapter with 2 Syrian women who are still living inside Syria, who are credited in the film under a pseudonym. And it was the first time that I have not been present. I'm a very, I'd like to say, feet in the living room filmmaker. So my relationships with the people I'm focusing on is really important. But, this was a war zone, a country under war. It would have been dangerous personally to our crew, but most importantly, we're focusing on a family whose child has been forcibly disappeared. And it would have been very dangerous for any family we focused on to have foreign crew coming in. And so pretty early on, we decided that that wasn't something I was going to go do. And yet, half of the country was forced to flee, but half of the country stayed behind. And I felt like that was an important element to include. I also, that storyline focuses on a child who has been disappeared and parents not knowing whether or not he is still alive, whether there's anything they can do to find him. And I felt like that not knowing for a film that was looking at the experience of parenthood during war was a really fundamental one to include. And so we were able to find 2 women who worked with us. They wore a lot of different hats, producing, camera, sound, and they went out and started talking with families. And one of the things that drew us to Dia and her family was that they had already been public about their son Mohammed's disappearance. They also, it was suspected very likely that he had been taken by ISIS. And so it was less of a risk for them to take. So, one thing was them agreeing to participate. Another thing was us agreeing that we were willing to have them take that risk. But it was a film, so dependent on people's faces that it wasn't something that we could make them anonymous. And so then I just did loads and loads of Skype calls and WhatsApp, and I went to Beirut and workshop footage with them, and they would manage to get themselves from Damascus to Masayaf, where we filmed, and we would manage to get the footage out, and not to go into too much detail because we want them to be able to do it again if they need to be. But it was, it was challenging. There was times at risk, but we always were led, by the safety of the family we were focusing on and our team first, but felt like it was really fundamental. And that was a place where it was so important to have so many Syrians working intimately on the film who could always, help us balance. You want to get the right things on the screen, but you want to get to them in the right way. And at the end of the day, we're human beings first and filmmakers second.
So of the countries you documented, other than Syria itself, Greece, Turkey, Germany, and the US, which one did you find to be most hospitable towards these displaced families? That might be a low bar to clear, but
exactly. I mean, it's such and I don't speak from firsthand experience. This is the second film that I've made about the refugee experience. I made a film a couple of decades ago called Lost Boys of Sudan, and then got to know a really large diaspora of the Southern Sudanese community. And I feel like the experience, as an outsider, the experience of displacement is such a layered one, and it's not linear either. It goes on and on and on. And so, I mean, I think there were elements, for example, where there were people in Greece really reaching out, a lot of volunteers showing up, trying to make things joyful. But, you know, Greece was so economically depressed that the opportunities to be able to find housing or enroll children in school or get jobs was so limited. And then, of course, there was a big backlash there too. So, I mean, I'm hard put to find one to brag about, to be honest. But I guess one of the things that was really important, and we were really grateful that it did keep coming up naturally in the days that we were filming with our subjects, is, you know, it's a lot of individuals showing up who aren't tasked necessarily. It's not their job, just people giving of themselves, and the people who are officially refugee workers, just like that personal connection. I think I can, you know, think of examples in every single story where that made a really critical difference. And particularly in our US chapter, you see that with both a pro bono lawyer and a public school teacher, you know, who just just extended themselves. But there were those folks in each story. So I can't brag on one of the countries. I think there were big challenges and points of light in each one.
And my final question, I was curious as to, you brought up the young man in the U.S. With his brother. What has happened to them since filming concluded?
Sure. Yeah. So Omar is the big brother, and Abid is his younger brother, who was a teen at the time. So Omar is still waiting on asylum. He's here legally, but he's sort of caught in the backlog of our whole delayed immigration system. So he's still waiting for his asylum. But Abid, who you see in high school during the film, has graduated high school and was granted asylum. And then wonderfully, Omar has married a Syrian woman who came here as a refugee with her extended family. So they moved to Houston and are living there and have 2 baby girls. Which he was already exhibiting his being a great father to his little brother, and now he is to 2 little girls. And one of the great things, sort of piggybacking on talking about, you know, people extending themselves, is he was almost done with his undergraduate degree in Syria when he had to flee in computer science, and kept trying to get through human resources online applications here in the States and never getting an interview. And finally, just through a personal connection, he managed to get an interview and was hired for a job 2 levels above what he interviewed for. And so he's working in quality assurance now in computers, and has started his own company where he trains refugees and displaced people to do quality assurance, and then he vouches for their skills and connects them with companies. And so he's already sort of, you know, giving back. So they're doing really well. And it's been, I mean, happily, with them being in the US, they're really the only people in the film, or so much of our crew is outside of the US, but they've been able to come and travel with us as we've shared the film theatrically. So that's been a real gift.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts panel for film documentaries. I'm Charlie Bright, and I am joined by Traci Curry and Stanley Nelson, the directors of Attica on Showtime, RJ Cutler, the director of Billie Eilish, The World is a Little Bit Blurry on Apple TV+, Robert Greene, the director of Procession on Netflix, Jimmy Chin and Chai Vasarhelyi, who both directed The Rescue, which is currently streaming on Disney+, and Megan Mylan, the director of Simple as Water, which is currently on HBO Max. First question I want to ask, and I want to start with you, Robert. What was it like to find out that you had been shortlisted for an Oscar nomination?
Oh boy. You know, well, I mean, everything in this process has been about these guys. So it's been really helpful for me on that level of like doing this kind of work, because I don't really overthink anything. I'm just always sort of checking in with the guys constantly. So it was all about explaining to them what this process is going to be like, and why I'm doing all this press, and why they're doing all this press, and why we're going to all these cool things, which now we're doing none of those things. We're doing it all virtually. But it just allows me to filter all my emotions through them. So I was just able to call them. It was incredible, actually. I called Doug, Susan, and Bennett, the producers, and Rob Kolodny, who shot the film. We all got on the phone and we just went person to person and called each of the guys and their partners and said, "Hey, we have this news." And now they're just pumped because they've been a part of the process throughout the whole thing. So it's great because I'm not even thinking about it in terms of me and how I feel about it at all. It's all about how they feel, which is great.
And what about you, Stanley?
It's a great honor. I mean, I think one thing that I immediately thought is that more people will see the film, and that's really what's important for us. Is that most people can see the film. So we knew that being shortlisted would mean that more people would see it, and that's a real important thing for us.
And Traci?
I think it was really just icing for me. I mean, I was so grateful to be able to even be a part of telling the story, to have all the people in the film have so much grace, is to be able to share with us what happened for the sake of getting this story told. And so to the extent that any of this gives this story and their experiences a bigger platform for people to understand what they went through, I'm all for it. So I'm just incredibly grateful.
And what about you, RJ?
Oh, I share everybody's. I think we've had common experience. It's a tremendous honor. It's a tremendous honor to be among this group of films. That was something that immediately really excited me. It's great for the team of filmmakers, and for those of us who got caught up in COVID and didn't have festival experience and things like that, or theatrical runs of much substance. The idea that the film will have perhaps a richer, longer life is an honor. It's all just a lovely honor that kind of is separate from the filmmaking itself, as we all really know. But that's okay too.
And Chai, how about you?
Well, it's kind of like a dreadful but hopeful moment, right? Like, it makes me hopeful because it means that people understand how the rescue is, like, kind of reminds us of what unites us, right? In a time where everyone seems so divided. It also, like, I believe awards are kind of like magic and unicorns and glitter. And like Jimmy's gonna be rolling his eyes. Where I'm like, who knows? Like, it's like a black box. No one knows what comes out of it, but you're just always grateful. And then it's like a dreadful, perverse pleasure in that I get to ask RJ, like, what was it like to make a film about a teenage girl? I get to talk about how Robert's got a green, a green lightning thing coming out of one side and like the red on the other side. And we get to have these conversations to talk about real stuff, which, especially after the past, 20 months, like it's rejuvenating. It's like, it's soul nourishing. But yeah, at the end of the day, we're just so grateful. And it's always like we're in the service of our participants, like the people who decide to trust us with their stories. And it makes me really happy to be able to be like, listen, like, you put yourself out there and people can hear you.
And Jimmy, I know you and Megan have a very interesting view on this, as you're both Oscar winners. So Jimmy, how did you react to getting shortlisted?
I mean, I think it is being grateful. Chai and I both had that opportunity or recognition, but yeah, very grateful. I think, like what RJ mentioned, when you look at all the films, just the number of topics, the ideas, I think as documentary filmmakers, everybody knows what it's like. There's that camaraderie of knowing that you bleed for these films, and you put a lot of heart into it. So I appreciate all the films on the list. It's an amazing list. And yeah, it's just an honor.
And Megan?
Again, echoing what everyone has said. I mean, none of us make films to win awards. You just would never do what we do for that. But we do make films for people to see them. And there's nothing like this for shining a light. And I think the recognition of the artistry is profoundly important and sustaining to me, that, you know, my peers thought there was something in what my team and I created. And it's validating to the people that you've said, trust me, we're going to share this. It's going to resonate with the world. And we can kind of come back and say, okay, see, your trust was well placed. So there's no downside to this for me. It's lovely.
Next question. The next question I wanted to ask, I want to start with you, RJ. You know, I know that you're all here to talk about your films, but I'm also curious as to, you know, what's impressed you over the which documentaries have impressed you over the from last year.
I've been moved by all of the films that I've seen, and I've seen them all. I think it's an incredible list. I've shared with Megan, Jimmy, and Chai, Traci, and Stanley, and Robert my great admiration for their films. I'm dazzled by the way in which Robert has consistently through his career worked with form and deepened, while breaking out experimentally, has deepened the what documentary is. Stanley is, of course, a national hero and a great legend, and what he and Traci have created is of monumental importance. For crying out loud, we're also myopic about our moment in history. We think that so much of our tragic kind of identity and the things that identify us in terms of racial strife in our history are all about the recent times. And then you realize, you see a film like this and you realize how deeply embedded the crisis of race is in this country, and how much it must be addressed, and how broken so many of our institutions are in kind of telling the truth. Jimmy and Chai, of course, thrill us with their storytelling always, and have created this incredible adventure film that you know, rivals what Marvel is doing in the theaters, and brings us inside something with these characters who you never would have found. And Megan has you know, opens our heart in these incredibly deep ways of observational filmmaking that reveals things I could never have imagined, struggles of deep humanity that are refugees are taking on and throughout the world. And it's not just these guys. I mean, it's the whole group of films that we're part of. It's a you know, I clearly am an enthusiast for this moment in documentary film. I can't believe it's everybody borrows form, borrows history, is inspired by each other's films and the history of documentary films. I'm grateful that you're asking the question, because it's, you know, it's not about, it's a great time. It's a great time to be part of this community. So there I go. You asked, you got a full answer.
And how about you, Chai?
I don't know. I'm just so grateful that people watch movies and they invest enough to be able to go on this journey with us, because isn't this, you know, it's all about being able to imagine yourself in the life of others. Because if we do that, you know, we're just a little bit more human. And I also say, like, it's incredibly like inspiring for me, or like, you know, like invigorating in a way when I see people reinvent a genre like Robert did. You know, like Procession is something, it's totally different. Like it looks in the way, same with The Act of Killing or other sort of films, like just look at a genre and say, like, it's not enough. And how can I like mess with it and play with it? And it's fun, even though it's in service of something that's incredibly serious and important. But, and, you know, I have to say the same thing about Attica, where like, you know, how do you go into like a historical subject matter and bring both a contemporary point of view and someone who was alive at the time? Stanley, I know you're a little bit older than we are, but and so like, I don't know, it's been like this wonderful reminder of why we do what we do. At the same time, like it's also a reminder of, you know, our work is not done. What else can we do and like push and annoy, and who else can we like, you know, I don't know, irritate, because that's kind of the point, isn't it?
And Jimmy?
I think the one thing that I really was paying attention to this year was just the craft of filmmaking, and how everybody brings something special and different to each story, and you see why the stories resonated with each of the directors and how they've shaped the stories and brought them to life. But yeah, I think, you know, there's a deep appreciation. Nonfiction documentary filmmakers, I think, as Megan said, you know, we don't obviously make films for awards. You make films because you deeply believe in telling a story that you feel needs to be told. And so I have deep appreciation for everybody here and everybody on the list.
And Megan, any documentaries that last year that really got to you?
Yeah, I mean, so many of them. And I think a through line that I've been feeling, maybe because our film is so much about this shared, profound, common experience of family, is how much of that sort of filmmakers looking for those points of entry of common experience and making me feel so, I mean, it's sort of so cliche of like, hey, we can all find our point of entry, but in just in ways with very distinct voices, like films that seem like they have nothing in common, they feel texturally so different, all sort of taking me to this same sort of profound shared human experience in really beautiful and exciting ways. And each one, you know, wanting to sit with it for days afterwards. Not each one on the huge list, let's be honest, but like a good chunk of them. So no, there's just some gorgeous work happening, and it feels like it's coming from really, really profound places of people not just pushing the boundaries of form and doing that and artistically, but also like inside of themselves, sort of digging in emotionally and intellectually. So it's exciting.
And Traci?
Yeah, I agree with what Megan just said. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the films that I've watched in the last year, and certainly the ones made by all the people here on this Zoom, are that, you know, not only have I felt more informed and enlightened about these stories that I didn't know about, but in different ways, all of these films really open up this window to empathy that I find really personally valuable, especially because we are in this moment in the pandemic where we are intimately aware of how connected we all are. But at the same time, alongside that is this sort of myopia of some people trapped in their individual experiences. And so I just really appreciate the way the films offer that moment of connection and understanding to people and experiences and ways of being that are so different from my own. And that really kind of helped remind me that, like, especially again in this moment, that there is this sort of undercurrent of connection that you can find with people who are different from you.
And what about you, Stanley?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that the shortlist does is kind of curate the films, you know, and there are 138 films on the first list, you know, and it's just overwhelming, you know, it's like 138, whoa, okay, you know, I can't do that. But, you know, it's, if you say, okay, there's 15 films, and, you know, somebody thought that these were 15 of the best films. Well, I can watch those, you know, and all the films, as everybody said, you know, are amazing. And for every film, you see why, you know, it's on the list. And you know, it's just a real pleasure to kind of have that curated for me and say, you know, these are what somebody thinks are the top films, and so that you know, I can watch them. And that's just as a viewer, not as a filmmaker.
And how about you, Robert?
Well, I mean, RJ started this by so brilliantly breaking down everyone's film and so kindly. But I will say, but RJ's film is just like all the films on this call, on this meeting. It's stories that you feel like you already maybe know, and then you don't know anything about them, right? Like I just remember feeling in The Rescue, just it turns out drowning is my biggest fear. So which I knew kind of in the back of my head, but watching that film, I was like, oh, that's my biggest fear. So seeing that executed on a cinematic level is so powerful. And then there's films like Ascension, Jessica Kingdon's amazing film, which is also shortlisted, or Fayadai, which is Jessica Bashir's amazing film. And both of those films really stand out to me because they're new voices telling documentary stories in different ways. And the fact that they are also being brought into the shortlist conversation is extraordinary. You know, they're just exciting filmmakers. I mean, I'm thrilled to be on this call with everybody, and just those two filmmakers specifically, I'm just so excited to see, you know, in some ways they were coming outside of, you know, mainstream documentary thinking in order to make their radically individualistic films. Specifically, Jessica Bashir worked 10 years on making Fayadai, and she taught herself the language of editing this film together. And I've never seen anything like it. And it took me in places that I couldn't believe. And I know for sure 10 years ago, that film's not getting shortlisted. I mean, it's just not. It's because, you know, and I'm really proud of us as a documentary branch because
2 years ago.
Yeah,
it's not getting
sure.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, you know, when Hale County got nominated, I couldn't even believe how great that was that Hale County got nominated. It's probably one of the most radical films to ever be nominated for an Oscar in any category ever. So the fact that us as a doc branch, like, I'm proud of what we've done with picking these films, honestly, because we're expanding the conversation.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining this panel, and we wish you all the best during this awards season. Thank you so much for joining us all on Meet the Experts.